Hari. Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yashodanandana Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jai Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी हरे कृष्णा कृष्णा कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे जय जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी गौर प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल। जय ओम विष्णुपद परमहंस परिव्राजकाचार्य अष्टोत्तर शत श्री श्रीमद श्रील अभय चरणानंद भक्तिवेदांत स्वामी महाराज श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। नाम आचार्य श्रील ठाकुर हरिदास की जय। प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Sham Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai, Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai, Navadvip Mayapur Dham Ki Jai, Ganga Devi Ki Jai, Yamuna Mai Ki Jai, Bhakti Devi Ki Jai, Tulsi Rani Ki Jai, Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai, Shri Harinama Sankirtana Ki Jai, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai, ISKCON BBT Samstapaka Acharya Ki Jai, Go Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga. Jai Shri Prabhupada. Do we have an outlet here somewhere? Electrical outlet? Or I might run out of power. Hare Krishna. One mask wearer here. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming. And we can speak a little bit about Krishna's holy name. Actually, I was asked to speak on this topic. I wanted to speak on something, few things, other things, but we'll see. So, how many people are chanting Hare Krishna every day? Japa. Okay, everybody pretty much. How many people are chanting 16 rounds every day? Good amount. How many people are chanting 16 rounds without any offense every day? Okay, it looks like that's where we need to focus. So, Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guroho Shri Utapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hare Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Gauranga bolite hobe pulaka sharir Hari Hari bolite noyane babe nir. Narottam Das Thakur says that when he chants the holy name of Lord Gauranga, the tears come from his eyes. Raise your hand if tears came from your eyes this morning when you began chanting your japa. Okay, so there's a difference between Narottam Das Thakur and ourselves. What is that difference? Well, there's a big difference. There's a lot of differences. But we have 3 stages of chanting. In the beginning, our first stage is that it's called Namabhas or even Namaparatha. We just may happen to come in touch with the holy name somehow or other, and we just somehow or other are able to recite the holy name also. But we don't really know what we're doing, and we don't really know where we're going, and we don't really want to go there either. So that's most of us at entry-level Krishna consciousness. Hopefully, if we have come into good association and are taking advantage of that association, this is called sadhu sangha, then we should at least be aware that the second stage is there, which is called the clearing stage. That's namabhas, which is like a reflection of the holy name or a shadow of the holy name, but still not really the holy name. The holy name actually manifests itself only when we are free from offenses. So we have to consider the 10 offenses that are that are there in chanting the holy name of Krishna. Where are those 10 offenses mentioned? Padma Purana. And we hear from it in several places throughout Srila Prabhupada's books. It's in Nectar of Devotion, it's in Nectar of, it's in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's in the Srimad Bhagavatam. For example, in Canto 2, Chapter 1, text number 11, Etannir vidyamananam itchatamakuto bhayam yoginam narapanirnitam harer namano kirtanam. That means that, O my dear king, the constant chanting of the holy name of the Lord after the ways of great authorities is the doubtless and fearless way of success for all, including those who are free from all material desires, those who are desirous of all material enjoyment, and those who are self-satisfied by a dint of transcendental knowledge. The same thing we hear in the 10th canto, roughly the same thing is described with regards to hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. 3 kinds of people take pleasure in hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. People who just want to hear stories, that's very big now, especially in Vrindavan. But also even here in America, also people mostly want to hear stories. And that's called, nice English word for this sort of thing, it's called infotainment. So, it's really just recreation, but there's some benefit there. It's not like degrading. Most of the proclivities that people perform here in Portland, Oregon, and in every other city in North America, they're degrading us, actually. Here's at least pious enjoyment. That much credit we can give. But even that is not necessarily going to give us love of Godhead. And that's why we find that even people who chant Hare Krishna, they don't advance, and they don't cry when they begin to chant their japa. So that's a problem. So that's ordinary people who like to hear about Krishna, or people who are seeking liberation like to hear about Krishna, and pure devotees who are liberated already and in pure devotional service. They like to hear about Krishna, all 3. So the same 3 are mentioned here in a different way, and with regard to chanting the holy name. Now this chanting is described in 2 ways. Etan nirvidyamananam ichitamakuto bhayam yoginam narpanirnitam harer nama anukirtanam. What's the difference between kirtan and anukirtan? Nama anukirtanam and just kirtanam. What is the difference? He gives in the commentary, Jiva Goswami, I think it is, all the commentators, including Srila Prabhupada. Actually, Srila Prabhupada's translation itself reflects the understanding given in the commentaries. First, constant chanting, that's anukirtanam. Chanting again and again. In other words, chanting every day. Actually, chanting every minute, it should be. But if you can't chant every minute, at least chant regularly. Just like Srimad Bhagavatam, again, The parallels are very clear. Hearing and chanting should be done in the same way. Srimad Bhagavatam, what does it say about hearing every day? What does it say? Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. Nityam means not only every day, but actually Nitya means constant, eternal. If you can't do that, it's okay. You're allowed to chant regularly instead. But the real thing is constant chanting. So constant chanting of the holy name of the Lord after the ways of the great authorities. Where is that in the Sanskrit? After the ways of great authorities. That's another way to interpret this idea of anu kirtanam, to follow. Anu means to follow something. So, sorry? Yeah, so to follow the ways of the great authorities. And they have told us so many instructions about how to chant the holy name properly in order to get the real result of that holy name. So Jiva Goswami, he's given his contribution to this understanding, this in his commentary to this verse in Kramasandarbha. He's the one who gives the 10 offenses and really dilates on what those offenses are practically. But Srila Prabhupada has also done so in his purport, because Srila Prabhupada's purports in general always and primarily just paraphrase those of his predecessors. He's not inventing anything out of whole cloth, and he's not getting too creative either. He's just repeating what he's heard and passing the message on, hopefully untouched. In his case, certainly so. So, in this verse, Srila Prabhupada writes, Srila Shukadeva Goswami recommends the transcendental chanting of the holy name of the Lord. By offenseless chanting and hearing of the holy name of the Lord, one becomes acquainted with the transcendental form of the Lord, and then with the attributes of the Lord, and then with the transcendental nature of his pastimes, etc. So the name will reveal itself to us when we are free from offenses. Krishna means not the name, sounds impersonal. Krishna, in the form of his name, will reveal himself to us. First thing we recognize is that this holy name is non-different from Krishna. But we don't have a conception of Krishna. That's our problem. Therefore, one has to become liberated first. Liberated means you realize, aham brahmasmi. I'm spirit soul. I'm not this material body. Only when we can understand ourselves can we even begin to understand Krishna, because Krishna is the supreme version and we are the minute version. Krishna is the supreme self and we are the small self. There's an eternal distinction. We are not God, although we are of the same transcendental nature. And it's imperative to realize that transcendental nature before we can understand anything about God. So that's another way of saying that before we can realize that Krishna and his holy name are one and the same, we have to realize what this Krishna actually is, or who this Krishna actually is. He is the supreme spiritual entity. Rupa Goswami says in his Namashtakam, he calls him Chidghana Sukha Swarupa. What does that mean? Chidghana Sukha Swarupa. He is the essence of highly concentrated ecstasy. This is the holy name of Krishna. Or as Taittiriya Upanishad says, Raso Vaisa. Whatever taste you're seeking in whatever activity you're performing in any world that you're doing it in, that taste is Krishna. So we all want Krishna, but we don't realize that we want Krishna. We're thinking we have to chase after something non-Krishna. Bhayam dvitiya bhinaveshata syat ishadapetasya viparyayo smritihi. By turning away from God and chasing after things that we think can replace him, we actually we lock ourselves in to these material bodies, one after another. In which case, distraction is our curse. We can hardly focus on anything because the modes of material nature are constantly, they hold us under siege. Last night we talked about how the material body is like a cage. So, and the cat outside the cage is like death. Certainly that's a fact. But these modes of material nature, they're constantly, it's like the air that we're breathing. So permeating, so much they permeate this material atmosphere. And they distract us from all things transcendental. So actually the number one offense is pramada, distraction. It's hard to focus the mind. When we're conditioned to trying to be Krishna instead of serving Krishna, it becomes very difficult to focus on Krishna. So that's our main problem in chanting the holy name. And this is the offensive stage. When we become when we enter the clearing stage, we're making an active effort, proactive effort. We're exercising our volition for the purpose of removing all the material distractions and anarthas and misidentifications and bad habits and misconceptions and desires and adi. Then we can approach what we call namabhasa, which is that shadow stage of chanting. It's still not exactly the pure name, but at least there's a dawning of the idea of chanting Krishna's name in pure love. And when we are adept at this practice of clearing ourselves from offenses, then we may come to the stage of offenseless chanting. It's in this offenseless stage that we get prema, pure love, real love. And it's in this stage that Narottam Das Thakur is chanting. And that's why he cries as soon as he mentions the name of Krishna. He knows who this Krishna is. He's recognized his own position vis-a-vis Krishna. So we have to go through these stages one after another. Now, Srila Prabhupada says here, we go from the stage of identifying the Lord and his name. That's the initial stage. That's kind of like, with God realization, it's like the counterpart of self-realization, wherein we identify ourselves as spirit. It's impersonal but spiritual realization. Brahmabhuti, it's called. So with regard to chanting the holy name, also, we may recognize that this holy name is actually not different from the Lord, in a dim way, in a vague way. But that's not at all the perfect stage either. Then what happens after that, Prabhupada says here? We become acquainted with the transcendental form of the Lord. In Kali Yuga, everybody wants to see God all the time, but in Kali Yuga, do you see God or do you hear God? You hear him. You see with your ears, that's to say. He's a sonic theology, one of my godbrothers put it. So we're all about sound vibration. Anavritti Shabdat in the Vedanta Sutra, it's stated the same way. By sound, one is taken out of this material world and placed into the spiritual realm. Kaler doshanit he rajan asti hieko mahad gunaha kirtanareva krishnasya muktabandha parambrajet. These two things have to happen. Muktabandha, that's just clearing out all the garbage. But positive side, parambrajet. You're going to the supreme destination, and that is Krishna, or Krishna Bhakti. So the holy name does both of these things. If our only adhikar or interest is for clearing out the anarthas and becoming liberated, then that's all the holy name will do for us. But if we make a conscious effort and beg and serve and surrender to the holy name, then the holy name will take us further. Not only out of material existence, but into spiritual existence. It's just tabula rasa is not a constitutional position. It's exactly like this. If someone is in the hospital sick, then, or in the prison, that's another way to put it, his only concern is to get out, right? Can you say that? Right. Nobody wants to be in prison, nobody wants to be in the hospital, so the first order of business, get out. Then figure out what to do after that. But getting out is not the only thing. There's a reason you want to get out. Why do you want to get out of the prison? Why do you want to get out of the hospital? You want to have a normal life. You want to do things. You want to love. Everything is there. The whole world is there. So in Krishna consciousness also, this holy name will take us out of this prison of material existence, but it will also put us into the bliss of devotional service if we ask, and if we practice, and if we actually earn mercy from the Lord by His divine grace. So we become acquainted with the transcendental form of the Lord, and then with the transcendental attributes of the Lord. This is called Nama, Guna, Rupa, and Lila. We see the oneness of the Lord in His name. We see that the Lord's form and the Lord's name are one and the same. We recognize that this Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whether in His name or otherwise, He has wonderful qualities, just like mercy. Mercy is such a wonderful thing. At the end of his Sri Krishna Lila Stava, I believe it is, Sanatana Goswami has praised the Lord's mercy very nicely. You can look that up, but it's such a wonderful thing, the Lord's mercy. And it's infinite. Of all the forms of the Lord, Krishna is the most merciful. That's good for us, because we're worshiping Krishna. And of all the forms of Krishna, because Krishna himself has different forms, who is the most merciful of Krishna's forms? Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Make no distinction between the two. There is no distinction. Krishna and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu are exactly the same personality. Not that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is an incarnation of Krishna. Sometimes we say that for convenience sake, but the fact of the matter is that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Krishna in his most merciful mood and appearance. So these are some of the qualities, probably the foremost quality of the Lord. And then finally the Leelas. If we can get past our offenses and become liberated and recognize that the name and Krishna are one and the same, and appreciate that this Lord has wonderful qualities, then we may actually enter into Leelas that entail all the above. And that is the perfection of life. Param Vrajet. This is what the holy name can do for us. Now, Srila Prabhupada adds to this trajectory. Here it is mentioned that one should constantly chant the holy name of the Lord after hearing it from authorities. This means that hearing from authorities is the first essential. We have to hear. That's why Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also said, Sthane sthita shrutikatang tanuvang manobhihi. Means you don't have to move to a Himalayan cave. You don't have to shave your head. You don't have to take sannyas or learn Sanskrit or any of the other things that people do for spiritualization. But you have to hear. You have to hear. Whatever situation you're in, fine, but hear. And hear every day. We've already described this. How often do we hear? Nityam. If you can't hear constantly, at least hear regularly. But it is imperative to hear at least every day. You have to do this. You'll not advance without this. One of my godbrothers got these little red boxes, which some of you have. Have you seen them? All of Prabhupada's kirtans and lectures. So he just turns that thing on, and whenever he carries it with him all day long. Whenever he's not doing something that absolutely requires his full concentration, then he's listening to Prabhupada. Like when he's getting dressed, when he's cleaning his house, when he's cooking, whatever. He's hearing from Srila Prabhupada. If you make your determination like this, Guru Mukha Padma Vakya, Chite Te Koriya Aikya, Arona Kori Homani Asha, then you will have at least 4 or 5 hours of association with Srila Prabhupada every day. What do you think that does to your consciousness if you're associating hours every day with Srila Prabhupada? Very, very quickly you're going to make spiritual advancement. Why don't we do this? Because we're not interested in spiritual advancement, unfortunately. We're like ghostly haunted persons, Jagadananda Pandit says. Person haunted by a ghost loses the ability to make his own choices, or at least loses the ability to make wise choices. So this should be done. Prabhupada is emphasizing. If we hear from Srila Prabhupada every day, then we get these instructions that are just sprinkled throughout all of his books, how to chant Hare Krishna properly. And this purport is an example, today's purport. So one should at least try to chant constantly or at least regularly, and one should definitely do so after the ways of the great authorities. In other words, according to the recommendations that they've given. What's an excellent recommendation given for neophyte devotees by Srila Rupa Goswami? Little small book. Think. Nectar of Instructions, such a golden mine of wonderful instructions given for free by Srila Rupa Goswami just to help us. And it begins all the way from a person who can't control his tongue. You don't have to raise your hand, I'm not going to ask whether you can control your tongue or not. Or maybe some other sense. We have so many of them, right? So, if you're in that struggling stage, which Krishna calls prakriti sthani karshati in Bhagavad Gita, then this holy name is for you. And hearing from Srila Prabhupada is for you, because you will be lifted out of that stage by this process. That's what it means to hear and chant after the ways of great authorities. Now, according to Shukadev Goswami, yoginam nripanirnitam, it is concluded positively. It is a settled fact. It is ascertained by even the great yogis that this is the process that we have to take up. Prabhupada writes here, the way of attaining success is an established fact, concluded not only by him, but also by all other previous acharyas. Therefore, there's no need of further evidence, actually, if you have faith. So, Jiva Goswami also instructs here that this chanting should be loudly done, and it should be performed offenselessly, as well as recommended in Padma Purana. One can deliver himself from all the effects of sins by surrendering himself to the Lord. And one can deliver himself from all offenses at the feet of the Lord by taking shelter of the Lord's name. But one cannot protect himself if one commits an offense at the feet of the holy name of the Lord. The name is there to give us mercy because we have offended the Lord. So what is our situation? What is our hope if we offend that very name who has manifested himself just to help us? Nam namakari bohudha nija sarva shaktistatrarpita niyamata hasmaranena kalaha etadrishita vakripa bhagavan mamapi durdaiva midishami hajini nanuragaha. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said that the Lord has come in so many 1,000 names. Not only Vishnu Sahasranam, there's in Vrindavan is very popular, Gopala Sahasranama also. Thousands of names. And he's made himself freely available, and each name has his potencies in full. Just like his different multi-forms. Deeparchidevi hidachantanam abhyupetya, deepayate vratahetu samana dharmaha. One diya, if you light another diya and another, they're all the same potency. Still, one is the origin. So the holy name is also like this. Krishna is the original name, and then other names are manifesting his brilliance to some degree or another. So one cannot offend this holy name and at the same time think that he can make any advancement. It's not possible, because the only way to make advancement in Kali Yuga, all the Shastras proclaim, and we've already heard, Shukdev Goswami himself proclaims, Niranitam, it's concluded, is this Harinam, chanting the holy name. Therefore, Harer Nama, Harer Nama, Harer Nama, Eva Kevalam, Kalau, Nastyeva, Nastyeva, Nastyeva Gatiranyatha. This is Puranas. So many Puranic evidences at Bhagavatam, full of verses like this. But even in the Shruti also, some people are only Shrutis, right? Like Arya Samaj, they don't like to hear from Puranas and other Smritis. They only Shruti. So, ठीक रहेगा, Shruti mein bhi, it's concluded, Niranitam, that iti shorashakam nam kali kalmasha nashanam nataha parotoropayo sarva vedeshu drishyate. What is he talking about? He's talking about the Mahamantra. These 16 names can deliver you from all the contamination of Kali Yuga. There's no doubt about it. There's no upaya, or there's no remedy for our situation superior to these 16 names, this Mahamantra. Even if you look throughout all the Vedas, you're not going to find anything because it's not there. This is the pinnacle, at least in Kali Yuga, of spiritual upayas, spiritual means of deliverance. Okay, but there are 10 offenses we mentioned, and that's what's keeping us, because we all, being in false ego and attached to that false ego, we naturally have these offensive tendencies. What is the first offense? We like to criticize. Paracharcha paraninda, isn't it? What is that? Surdas, he said, Ninda Shabda Rasala. This is Nacho Bahut Gopal. Anybody heard this song? Very famous bhajan. But he's finally woken up and he said, listen, I've been dancing to the tune of Maya for so long, and this, I'm hearing, the mridangas, the sound of all this attachment, and the talas, the gunkurus is the representation of some other attachment, and the sweet ringing of the nupurs, the gunguru, this is the relishable sound of blaspheming others. We like to do this because we're insecure ourselves or for other reasons. So that has to be avoided. It's said that this is paramama paratham. How many people recite these 10 offenses every day? Raise your hand. 1 person, 2 people, 4. So 4, 5, maybe 6. Not enough. How are you going to avoid these 10 offenses if you're not even reminding yourself what they are? Can you recite the 10 offenses? Yes, you. Krishna Bola. So, Satam Ninda Namna Paramama Paratham Vitanate. To blaspheme those who are saintly, the devotees, that means. This is the Paramam Aparatham. This is the supreme offense. Yatha kyatim yata katamohasahate tadvikaraham. How is it that the Lord can tolerate this? This is a rhetorical question the verse poses here. How can the Lord tolerate when you criticize somebody who's dedicated his life to glorifying Him? It's intolerable for the Lord. How are you going to make advancement if you're doing things that are intolerable for the Lord? Common sense. Second offense, to see the holy name in terms of worldly distinction, or another way of saying it is Shivasya Shri Vishnurya Iha Gunanamadi Sakalam Dhya Bhinnam Pashyet Sakhalu Harinama Hetakaraha. The holy name is not going to help you if you're thinking that Krishna's holy name and the names of others, deities, are one and the same, because they're not. On the other hand, Dhya Bhinnam Pashyet Sakhalu Harinama Hetakaraha. You also cannot make advancement if you're seeing a distinction between Krishna and these other, say, devatas. The name of Shiva is mentioned twice here, actually. So, Lord Shiva and Lord Vishnu, they're on the same page. Once I was in Tiruchendur, South India. That's the seat of probably the second biggest Murugan temple in Tamil Nadu. And I was staying in the Agraharam there, all Brahmin priests who were employed by the temple. So we were doing program, and one girl raises her hand and asks the $64,000 question. So tell me, is Krishna supreme or is Skanda supreme? I was on the hot seat. So I told her, you go into Skanda's temple, like I have done many times, and you pray very, very, very hard. And ask him, you please show me what is the absolute truth. And he will do it. He will do it. I've seen it millions of times. Well, not millions, but many, many times. He will help if we ask, which we have to ask. Because vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripasindhupya evacha. The devotees are just like oceans of compassion. And Vaishnavanam yatha shambhuhu, Srimad Bhagavatam says. Lord Shiva is the topmost of them. So, second offense is to distinguish between Shiva and Vishnu as if they were competing in some way or independent of each other in some way. They're not. They're on the same page. They're serving the same purpose. To make an artificial distinction and to think that one can do something that the other can't do, that's wrong. That's an offense. On the other hand, to say that they're absolutely the same is also an offense. Look at it this way. If the ambassador comes to the country, he's treated just as much as the prime minister, just with equal respect, practically speaking. But we don't address him as prime minister, right? This is the same thing. Third offense, to disobey the orders of the spiritual master, the authorized acharyas or spiritual masters, gururavagnya, or to neglect what they have taught us. That's not good. Srila Prabhupada doesn't say so much about it here, and neither does Jiva Goswami. But the spiritual master gives an instruction, you have to follow it. That's why we have to be very careful before we accept a spiritual master. All the critical thinking is employed in full degree, but not after initiation, before initiation. Because after initiation, you have to follow this injunction. So one has to take this very carefully. Srila Prabhupada has given many instructions. For ISKCON, also, he's given instructions, and we don't have much to show. Varnashram is one of them, for example. Fourth offense, to blaspheme Vedic literatures or Vedic knowledge. This is more common among the Western membership of ISKCON or the Western people in general. I mean, some offenses are more common in South Asia, and some of them are more common in the Western world. This is one. To dismiss certain scriptures as if they had no relevance to your Krishna consciousness. There is a hierarchy of scriptural authority. That is a fact. You cannot compare Bhagavatam to, say, Manusmriti, but neither can you reject either one of them, because they're endorsed on every other page of Srila Prabhupada's books. So it becomes an offense to blaspheme these Vedic literatures. Shruti Shastra Nindanam. There are two broad divisions of scripture we discussed last night. Shruti means the four Vedas and the Upanishads that they contain, and Shastra means everything that follows from them. Bona fide scripture. So we have to respect both. Fifth offense, to Tatharthavado Harinamna Kalpanam. To think that this glorification of the holy name is all just exaggeration. That will not help us to chant the holy name. We have to have some faith, actually. Sixth offense, to give some mundane interpretation of the holy name. Just like one politician in India, he wrote a commentary on Bhagavad Gita, and he said, Krishna means dark, correct? Krishna, does it mean black? Yes, it does. And black means unknown, right? Something dark, you don't know what's in there, right? Therefore, Krishna means the great unknown. This is a concoction. Krishna means Shyam Sundar, Yashodanandan, Nanda Kumar, Makanchor. Simple. Don't complicate things. So that becomes an offensive situation. Now, the seventh offense, Srila Prabhupada sometimes says, this is the worst of them all. What is that seventh offense? Namno balad yasya hi papa buddhir. To intentionally do something sinful and, to make a plan that I'm going to, I'll make a big mess with my karma and then I'm going to wipe my feet on the holy name to clean it off. That's not very good at all. That's really not good. To commit sins on the strength of chanting the holy name, Srila Prabhupada says that this is the worst offense, actually. The scriptures say that you can be liberated from the effects of all sinful reaction by chanting the holy name, but one who takes advantage of this transcendental method and continues to commit sins on the expectation of neutralizing the effects by chanting is the greatest offender at the feet of the holy name. such an offender cannot purify himself by any recommended method of purification. Namno baladyasya papa buddhir na vidyate tasya yamayar hishuddhihi. Yama. Yama means by discipline. Your discipline is going to be useless. It will not purify you if you have that mentality. No matter how strictly you follow otherwise. If you have that mentality, nothing is going to purify you. That's one way to interpret it. Otherwise, what else does yama mean? Yama. Yamaraj. Even you go to hell and suffer the results of your sinful activities, that also won't purify you of this tendency. You have to surrender. And that's by devotional service, by making an effort to free ourselves from these offenses. So one should strictly restrain oneself from committing a sinful acts with the hope that he's going to counteract his sins and the holy name is going to give him protection. Especially if it's deliberate. Accidental, something you do wrong, sometimes it happens. When we're learning how to walk, sometimes we fall, we just get up and keep going. But to deliberately do something devious and then deliberately try to calculate that, let me purify it now. Very, very bad mentality. 8th offense. To consider the holy name of the Lord and its chanting method to be equal to some material auspicious activity. This is the South Asian thing, right? We don't make a distinction between, what is that, dharma, vrata, tyaga, huta, adi, sarva, shubha, kriya, samyam. This is the offense. Hutas and tyagas and vratas that we do and, visiting other, devatas, mandirs and so many other things. It's all equal to the holy name. In the Hindu mind. This is the general conception. Sometimes they even explicitly claim yatoma tatopat. It's all one, all the same, no matter what you do. This is not good. This will never appreciate what the holy name is if we retain this mentality. To dig wells or to open hospitals or to organize eye camps or to give charity or whatever, it's not the same thing as chanting the holy name. Why is that? Because these things will elevate you, zurur, but only within the realm of karma. You can get better karma, that's all. The holy name, we've already described, it takes you out of karma altogether and places you within devotional life, which is a very, very different thing. So this has to be understood, and it's understood too rarely, unfortunately. So Srila Prabhupada actually, in this purport here, he actually waxes on this point quite a bit. He says, there are various kinds of good works for material benefits, but the holy name and his chanting are not mere auspicious holy services. Undoubtedly, the holy name is holy service, but he should never be utilized for such purposes. In other words, it's an offense to utilize the holy name to purify your sins, and it's also an offense to utilize the holy name to become pious so you can enjoy in this world. They're both offensive. Since the holy name and the Lord are of one and the same identity, one should not try to bring the holy name into the service of mankind. The idea is that the Supreme Lord is the supreme enjoyer. He's no one's servant or order supplier. Similarly, since the holy name of the Lord is identical with the Lord, one should not try to utilize the holy name for one's personal service. Do you see why we said that the very first thing about realizing this holy name is to realize that the Lord and his name are one and the same? It's very important because all these offenses are based on the absence of that recognition. The 9th offense is another one that we see quite a bit, to instruct somebody who's not interested about the transcendental nature of the holy name. If such instruction is imparted to an unwilling audience, the act is considered to be an offense at the feet of the holy name. That is to say, Ashraddhane vimokepya shrinviti yashchopadesha shivanama aparatha. Now this is an interesting thing. To instruct somebody who doesn't have faith and is not interested in hearing what you have to say about the holy name, that becomes an offense because Devotional, this is about devotional service, and devotional service is always voluntary. It's love. It's not law. Law is necessary only when love has already failed. And if someone is not ready to hear something, then it makes no point to try to force him. We discussed this a little bit last night. So that's a very important instruction as well. Finally, 10th offense is to become uninterested in the holy name even after hearing the transcendental nature of that holy name. Shrute pinama mahatmya priti rahito naraha. If a person, even after hearing the glory of the holy name, still remains devoid of love, prema rahita, devoid of love of Godhead, then that person is an offender. Yapriti rahato naraha. Aham mamadi paramo. And he has this attitude that the supreme thing is me and mine. That's false ego. Namni sopya paradhikarat. That person is an offender. So Prabhupada writes here, false egotism is exhibited by thinking oneself to be the enjoyer of the world and thinking everything in the world to be meant for one's own enjoyment. The whole materialistic world is moving under such false egoism of I and mine. But the factual effect of chanting the holy name is to become freed from such misconceptions. Now, do you see again? This is another way of looking at the same 8th offense, which was to equate fruitive activities or fruitive elevation with devotional service. They're very, very different. Fruitive elevation is all about enjoying one's false ego in this material world. But devotional service takes us beyond that false ego and places us in our constitutional position. They cannot be compared. So these are important points. There's too much commentary on this verse, but Srila Prabhupada's purport, I think, summarizes all of it very well. And he's said the important things that we need to hear. If we are very mindful about these 10 offenses, and one way to demonstrate that consciousness is by reciting them every day, then we can chant in such a way that we can actually make positive progress. And we will taste that positive progress ourselves. Nobody has to tell us. Bhagavatam says this. When you eat, when you're hungry and you eat, 3 things happen. Your tongue is satisfied, your hunger is appeased, and your body becomes nourished. And you don't have to ask the person next to you if you're experiencing these things. You know it. You can feel it directly. Pratyakshaavagamam dharmyam susukham kartam avyayam. So chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. After the ways of the great authorities, and constantly in the ways that we've discussed, it has the same effect. It is something that we directly experience. We realize that we are not this body. We recognize that this holy name is the authority to whom I'm trying to surrender. We get some insight into his transcendental qualities. We may even recognize that this sound vibration is in fact the form of the Lord that we worship. And hote, we can enter into his leelas. But only if we are free from these 10 offenses, and that's why in the beginning stage we have to avoid these 10 offenses very carefully. Hence I suggested we chant them. So again, Srila Prabhupada's translation, O King, constant chanting of the holy name of the Lord after the ways of the great authorities is the doubtless and fearless way of success for all, including those who are free from all material desires, those who are desirous of all material enjoyment, and those who are self-satisfied by dint of transcendental knowledge. There's only one more verse that I'd like to share in this regard, because it's